All right, let's dive into the mysterious world of the Chinese grouse. It's a bird that's so elusive, it's almost like a mythical creature. But we're going deep into the research, the articles, the field notes to try and uncover what we can about this really fascinating and little-known grouse species.
Yeah, and you know what's really cool about this is there's just so much we don't know. It's really like putting together a puzzle, but a lot of the pieces are missing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So, in this deep dive, I guess our mission is to uncover as many of those puzzle pieces as we can, right? Like, what do they even look like? What's their lifestyle? How do they fit into the ecosystem? And what are some of the challenges that they're facing? Kind of a lot to cover.
There is, but it's a fascinating journey. So let's start with the basics. What does the Chinese grouse actually look like?
Okay, so paint us a picture. What are we dealing with here?
Well, imagine a bird, kind of small, about the size of a pigeon. And the most striking thing about them is their camouflage. I mean, they're practically invisible in the dense forest where they live.
Wow, so they're masters of disguise, huh?
Absolutely. You know, their plumage, it's this amazing blend of browns and grays and whites, like they're wearing the forest itself.
Okay, so they blend right in. Now, why is that so important for them?
Well, it's all about survival, right? They have predators to worry about, like the northern goshawk, which is this really fierce raptor. It hunts in these same forests.
So the camouflage helps them avoid becoming a hawk's lunch, basically.
Exactly. The grouse just melt into the background, the undergrowth. That muted coloring makes them practically invisible to those sharp eyes of a hawk.
Wow, that's incredible. They're like little ninjas of the forest. But are there any, I don't know, any features that kind of give them away? Any little details that stand out?
Well, the males actually have a secret weapon for attracting mates. They've got this distinctive black throat patch.
Oh, interesting. Like a little bit of flair.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a visual cue during the breeding season. Helps them stand out when they need to, even though they're otherwise pretty understated in their, fashion choices.
I love that. Like a subtle signal in otherwise, camouflaged world. So we have this picture of a small camouflaged bird expertly blending into these forests. But where are these forests exactly? What kind of habitat are we talking about here?
So picture this. You're hiking up a steep mountain slope in western China. The air is cool, crisp. You're surrounded by these towering coniferous trees and broadleaf trees. That's where you'd find the Chinese grouse in these, what we call montane mixed forests.
Monte. Okay, so we're talking about mountains, right? Makes sense. But why this specific type of forest? Why are they there?
It's all about the undergrowth. These forests have a dense layer of shrubs, things like birch and rhododendron. And that provides, the perfect cover for them to forage for food and to hide from those predators.
So a hidden world within a hidden world.
Right, and it's teeming with life, tons of insects, buds, berries, seeds. It's like a buffet for these birds.
Sounds like a pretty good place to call home if you're a grouse. Now, we know they're in China, but how widespread are they? I mean, are we talking about the whole country, or is it a more localized area?
It's actually really localized. The Chinese grouse is what we call endemic to China, which means it's found nowhere else on Earth.
Oh, wow. So they're truly unique to that region. Okay, so even within China, are they kind of all over, or is it more specific?
Yeah, even within China, it's pretty limited. You mostly find them in the central and western provinces, like Sichuan, Gansu, Qinghai, Shaanxi.
Okay, so they're like true locals, really sticking to that specific region. But what does that mean in terms of their vulnerability, especially considering, all the environmental changes that are happening around the world?
Yeah, that's a really important point to bring up. Because they're endemic to such a limited area, it makes them really, really vulnerable to habitat loss and also to habitat fragmentation. Their entire world exists within these really specific pockets of forest.
Okay, so habitat loss, that's something that we hear about a lot with different species.
hmm
But can you break it down for us in the context of the Chinese grouse? Like, what does that actually look like on the ground?
It's kind of like, imagine a puzzle, a giant puzzle, where all the pieces represent, patches of grouse habitat. And then someone comes along and starts like yanking out pieces of the puzzle,
Oh, wow, yeah.
leaving these gaps and these like isolated fragments. That's what habitat loss is doing to the Chinese grouse.
So it's not just about like the overall amount of forest that's being lost,
Yeah,
but it's about, how that loss is actually breaking up their world, their ability to move around.
exactly. Think of it this way. If you could only move between, I don't know, like a few scattered islands,
Okay.
it would be pretty tough to find food, a mate, or just a safe place to, like, rest. And that's the kind of challenge that the Chinese grouse are facing as their habitat gets more and more fragmented.
Yeah, it's like their world is shrinking, even if there's still some forest left.
Hmm.
And I know one of the, biggest culprits here is logging, but what makes that so damaging, especially for this particular bird?
Logging, especially when it's not done sustainably, can be really devastating. And it's not just about removing trees. It's about disrupting the entire ecosystem,
Yeah.
right? The undergrowth that the grouse need for cover, well, that often gets destroyed during logging. Their food sources get depleted, and the forest becomes much more vulnerable to other threats, like wildfires.
Yeah, it's like pulling on a thread of a sweater and watching the whole thing unravel. It's all connected.
Yeah.
But logging isn't the only thing putting pressure on these forests, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are other factors at play here, too.
Sadly, you're right. As China's population grows, so does the demand for farmland. And so a lot of forests get cleared to make way for agriculture, which further squeezes the grouse's habitat.
Makes sense. More people need more food.
Exactly. And then you've got the issue of infrastructure development. Roads, railways, dams, they all cut through forests, which creates these barriers to wildlife movement, and that just isolates populations even further.
Yeah, it's like we're building obstacles right in their living room,
Right.
right? Like they
Yeah.
can't even get to their food, their mates, or just move around their own territory freely. It's a little bit grim, to be honest.
Yeah. No, it's definitely cause for concern. And that's a big part of the reason why the Chinese grouse is currently listed as near threatened on what's called the IUCN Red List.
Okay, so but for those who may not be familiar with that, can you kind of unpack that a little bit? What does that mean, near threatened? And what is the IUCN Red List?
Sure. So the IUCN Red List, it's like imagine a global barometer, but for species vulnerability to extinction. It's managed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature.
Okay, so it's like a big list of species and their conservation status.
Exactly. And near threatened means they're not quite endangered yet, but they're teetering on the edge. It's a warning sign that we need to take action now, like today, to prevent them from declining even further.
So one step away from endangered, basically.
Yeah, you could say that. And it's not just habitat loss that they're dealing with. We have to factor in climate change too, and that's adding another layer of complexity to this already pretty challenging situation.
Right. We talked about climate change a little bit earlier, but can you give us maybe a little more detail on how that specifically impacts a bird like the Chinese grouse? Like, what does that look like for them?
Think of it like this. There's this delicate balance scale, okay? And on one side, we have all the grouse's needs. Food, shelter.
Right.
And on the other side, we have their environment. Now, climate change is like throwing weights on the environment side of that scale, and it messes up the whole balance.
Okay, I like that visual. But what are those weights specifically? What kind of changes are we talking about here?
Well, rising temperatures, right? That's a big one. And that can impact things like the timing of when plants grow and when insects are available. And that messes with the grouse's food supply.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
And then you have changes in rainfall patterns. It can lead to more droughts, more floods, which makes their habitat a lot less suitable. And then in the long term, climate change can even completely change the composition of the forest itself.
So the very trees that they depend on for, shelter and food, those might start struggling. And then other species, ones that aren't as suitable for the grouse, those might move in.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, there's the added pressure of hunting.
Wait, I thought we talked about how there were, like, legal protections in place for the Chinese grouse.
Right, there are. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean that hunting has been completely eliminated. We still see poaching happening, driven by, demand for the bird's meat or feathers.
Oh, wow. I see.
And even legal hunting, if it's not properly managed, can still put a lot of strain on these already vulnerable populations.
So we have this combination of habitat loss, climate change, and hunting pressure. And it's all coming together to create this, like, perfect storm for the Chinese grouse. It's a lot to take in, to be honest. It's a lot to process.
It's a challenging situation, for sure. But I do want to say that there is hope. There are people working really hard to protect these birds, and their efforts are really making a difference.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about that. I mean, what are some of the things that are happening right now to help this, elusive bird? What gives you hope in all of this?
One of the most promising strategies is establishing these protected areas, kind of like nature reserves.
Okay, so like safe havens for the birds.
Exactly. They're areas where logging and other stuff that could harm the grouse, that's restricted, so it gives them a chance to, actually thrive.
So kind of like national parks, but specifically focused on, like, grouse conservation.
Yeah, pretty much. And, it's not just about drawing lines on a map and calling it a day. It's really about active management, like restoring habitats that have been degraded, maybe controlling invasive species, even setting up like captive breeding programs if populations are really struggling. It's all about making sure that these areas are actually working for the grouse.
Yeah, making sure they're actually beneficial. I get it. So, beyond those protected areas, are there other things being done to help?
Oh, definitely. There's this big push for sustainable forestry practices, even outside those protected zones. So that means, harvesting timber in a way that doesn't completely wreck the ecosystem.
So you can still use the forest, but you do it in a way that lets it regenerate.
Right. And that way, you're ensuring that there's going to be habitat for the grouse and other wildlife in the long run.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance, right,
Yeah.
between using the resources we need and also, making sure that the forest is healthy for the future. I imagine it's a lot of work, though, to kind of shift things from the way they've been done for so long, you know?
Yeah, it definitely takes a lot of effort, collaboration, and like a real change in mindset. But it's so worth it because healthy forests, they provide clean air, clean water, biodiversity, all this stuff that we need.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that protecting nature is really about protecting ourselves, too, right, in the end.
Absolutely. And, we've talked a little about this before, but getting the local communities involved is like absolutely key to successful conservation.
Right, right. But what does that look like when we're talking about a bird that's, like, practically invisible?
Well, for starters, it's about actually listening to the people who live near these birds, understanding their needs, their perspectives. It's not about just barging in with a like save the grouse campaign. It's about finding ways that conservation and the well-being of those communities can actually, work together.
Yeah, win-win scenarios, basically.
Exactly. And, we touched on ecotourism earlier. Well, imagine this. You're hiking through these like incredible forests in the mountains, and you've got a local guide who knows every nook and cranny of the place. They're pointing out signs of the grouse, telling you stories about the forest, helping you like really understand how everything's connected.
It sounds like an amazing experience, honestly.
It really is. And the best part is that the money from that ecotourism, it goes right back into the community, which helps support people's livelihoods, funds those conservation projects we were talking about, and it just gives everyone like a real incentive to protect the grouse and its habitat.
So it's like good for the people and good for the grouse.
Exactly. And then there are these other cool programs where they're training locals to be like citizen scientists.
Oh, cool. I've heard of those.
So they're out there collecting data on the grouse, keeping an eye on any changes in the habitat, reporting any like poaching or illegal activity. They're like the eyes and ears on the ground.
That's awesome. So it's not just like passive involvement. They're really contributing to the research and the conservation.
Yeah, and it gives them ownership, like it makes them stewards of their own environment.
I love that.
And some communities are even involved in these habitat restoration projects, planting trees, clearing out invasive plants, literally trying to like rebuild those connections between the fragmented forests.
It's amazing all these people coming together to rebuild the grouse's home, piece by piece.
Yeah, and it's not just about the grouse. These efforts often have like a ripple effect. Reforestation can improve water quality, reduce soil erosion, even create new jobs in sustainable forestry. It's like a positive feedback loop where protecting nature ends up benefiting everyone.
It's really inspiring to hear about all these initiatives and to see that they're making a real difference. It gives me hope, not just for the Chinese grouse, but for all these other species that are facing similar challenges.
Yeah, me too. It shows us that conservation can work, especially when it involves everyone, when it's community driven, when people understand that nature isn't just something out there, but something that's deeply connected to their own lives, their well-being. That's when they become its most, passionate defenders.
Beautifully put. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the Chinese grouse, what's like the one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
The biggest thing is that the fate of this bird, this elusive creature hidden away in those mountains, it's connected to all of us
Yeah.
in a way. Every choice we make, every action we take, it has an impact. So, by making informed choices, supporting conservation efforts, advocating for a more sustainable future, we can all help make sure that the Chinese grouse and all the other amazing creatures out there continue to thrive, for generations to come.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for taking us on this journey, for sharing your knowledge and your passion for this incredible species.
It was my pleasure.
And to all of you listening out there, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, every species has a story to tell. And every single one of us can make a difference. So keep exploring, keep learning, keep advocating for all the wonders of our natural world. Until next time.